I'm freshly emotional from the newest Spider-Man movie. I've got leftover movie snacks, some water. Let's make a skirt. Circle skirts. So I have seen a few different ways to do elastic waistbands online, and I don't do them like that. So I'm not gonna claim I made this method, but I've not seen it covered. So I'm gonna walk you through how I do circle skirts that are elastic waistband. Pardon. And it's also used as a gathering technique if you hate gathering by hand. So let me get some stuff. All right. So with me I have grabbed an example of a skirt type that I want to make, just to show you where we're going. And then also why I'm even doing this today. So if you don't care about why I'm making a circle skirt and you'd rather just see the tutorial, feel free to skip ahead. I will provide timestamps. Otherwise, this is my first cosplay. She's a little rough. And when I made the skirt, I had no idea what I was doing. So I went into Joann's, rest in peace, and I found the shiniest orange fabric. And I just grabbed a bunch of it. It was not enough to make a skirt. So this is really just two panels, literally sewn straight. And it is hideous. I hate the finish on the satin. I was all for it until I learned what dull bridal satin was. And then I was like, wow, this looks bad. So I want to recreate this skirt in a circle skirt. Also, this is done with eyelets. It's got some sort of built-in petticoat situation. It's just awful. So this is what I want to remake, and I've come a long way since then. So I have made two circle skirts done the same way, and just to give a preview, this is from a Mantis Lord cosplay. If you can't tell, big Hollow Knight Silk Song fan. So I created a circle skirt here where it's got an elastic waistband, so it does give a little bit of a gathering effect, but that's not the reason why I did it this way. I did it this way because I'm sure many people can relate. You make a costume and you weigh a certain amount, and then you no longer weigh that certain amount, and then you can't wear that costume. So that's where we started. I also have behind me, I just did another Run Fair skirt. Also, elastic waistband. This one's 3 tiers. This one's actually tablecloths. And then I mentioned before, it's also what we're doing today can be used as a generic gathering technique. And this would be an example of, this is a chemise for a Run Fair costume. And I did the gathering with the same method. I've previously hand gathered. I need to grab that shirt, but I'll put some footage up of that, and you'll probably be able to tell the difference immediately. Not only is this one elastic, so it can adjust with my arms, but it just looks nicer. I also just did a better job. So maybe not the fairest comparison.
To get our measurements to put into the circle skirt calculator, I'm going to start by measuring the biggest part of my lower half of my body, I suppose. This came out to about 42 inches for me, and then I'm just making sure I can slide on and off that measuring tape easily from that area so that I know when I make the skirt, then it will slide on and off that same way.
Okay, so here I've pulled up a circle skirt calculator. You can also do the math by hand if you choose to, but this is just easier. Also, it tells you how much fabric you're going to need in the end, which is very valuable. So here in the waist measurement, you're actually going to add your largest measurement, like around your butt, as you're pulling up the skirt. Your skirt length will still be like the length from your waist to wherever you want the skirt to land. And I will say, when you add the waistband, you may add about an inch onto that length. So if you're really close on fabric, just a little bit short, you might still be okay. Also, depending on what kind of hem you want to put on the bottom of it. And then it's going to give you your waist radius and your fabric length. My largest spot, I guess, when pulling up a skirt is 42 inches. I'm going to do 44 just to give a little bit of wiggle room. If you're like dead on that measurement, once you add a little bit of thickness due to the fabric and everything, it might be a bit of a problem. So I would recommend not adding a few inches. I mean, not adding a few inches. I would add a few inches. And then I'm just double checking now the length. I kind of like to figure this out later because I don't know what kind of hem I'm going to do. So I cut it long and then I cut it back later. So I'm going to measure from my waist because that's where the skirt's actually going to sit. Looking down at my ankle is about 36 inches. I already bought the fabric because I've already done this math. So this is purely for your sake. So what is the radius? What is the fabric length? That is what we will transition to next. So this number will be important, this 6.215 radius. I'm just going to round that to 6.25. Ultimately, does it really matter? No, it's just going to be a little bigger. So another note, if you want to make a more gathered skirt, the wider you make your radius, the more fabric is going to bunch up to your waist. So if I wanted to make a really, really gathered skirt, I could do an even larger waist radius. I just need to be conscious of what that fabric length can actually reach because it'll make sense when it's all laid out. The bigger your radius, the less length you get off of your fabric. So you might need to buy a wider fabric, something like that. But that is how you could get more of a gathered look, or less. If you really don't like the gathered look, then I would keep it like this. I am not opposed to the gathered look, but once again, it's not what I'm going for. I like the elastic waistband just because it's adjustable and it's also shareable. Your friends can wear it, siblings, whoever, it doesn't matter. So that's really what's nice about the elastic. But if you just want a really easy way to gather, that's something you can do as well.
Down at the bottom here is where you can find the formula for how much actual fabric you will need. Here's your yardage. So from your measurements, that's where you can go in and get your yardage.
Here's my fabric behind me. The first thing I need to do is actually sew it into a square. So I have a really long strip here, and I need to be able to, when folded in half twice, have a length of 44 inches. And that's the typical width of fabric. This I bought a long time ago from Mood Fabrics. I don't remember the exact width. I suppose I can measure it. Pardon you. It's like 50-ish, somewhere around there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna fold this in half, and then I'm going to sew it together to make a slightly wider rectangle that's shorter. And if you're looking at this fabric and you're like, oh my God, that's so ugly, it's worse than your other fabric. I also bought liquid organza when I was scheming. Look at that. Isn't that cool? I thought I might give it a cool flame effect. This is for Flame Princess. I didn't say earlier what the cosplay was. Flame Princess from Adventure Time. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this yet, but it's going to make it on the skirt somehow, some way. I don't have a ton of it. It is expensive, but it is a wider cut of fabric. So I might be able to get away with doing like some flame cutouts and doing a top layer on the circle skirt so that I have the dull orange bridal satin on the bottom and maybe like some flames coming from the top. I don't know. I really wanted the flame effect on the bottom, but I didn't. I mean, I probably have enough to figure it out, but we worry about that later. For now, I'm going to fold this in half. And I definitely have way more fabric than I need. When you go on that circle skirt calculator, which I'll have linked below, you can, at the bottom, determine the yardage that you need from the circle skirt. That's probably like the most helpful thing about using a calculator like that instead of doing it by hand. Well, obviously it tells you the formula. You can do it by hand, but
With my fabric folded in half, I'm just cutting it so that I can separate the front and the back panels.
I remembered that I wanted pockets on this, so that is going to change the order of operations a little bit. Last time I made pockets, I didn't sew the two panels of the circle skirt together until I was ready to put in the pockets. So how I'm actually going to do this is, it's not all that different. So what you could do, you could sew up this long line that I have just created, right sides together, flip it inside out. Now you have your circle skirt that you can fold in half and then in half the other way. Where you get the point, that's where you measure your your radius for your waist. And instead what I'm gonna do is I'm going to individually fold these in half without sewing them together yet, measure that waist radius, and then I can cut them out. I can cut out the bottom length as well. Then when sewing up the side, that's where we're gonna add the pockets. So we add the pockets in to where the seam is going to go. And then instead of sewing a straight line, we'll sew where that pocket is and then back up. And then because you've sewn your pocket right side together, you get a really nice finished pocket in it. You could alternatively sew this all together, build the skirt if it's easier that way mentally, and then seam rip part of it and go back and add the pockets. It's not as easy, so I'm trying to be proactive. That's what I did on my last one. So I'm trying to think through this now, do it now, so I don't have to fix that later. So that's what we're gonna do, is cut each panel separately, sew them together with the pockets, and then at that point I can then add the elastic waistband and do the hemming, and then we'll be done.
Right now, I am going through and measuring that radius. These are my two individual pieces folded together on the center. This is where I'm using the 6.25 from the circle skirt calculator earlier. I will find out very soon that it's not enough because I didn't account for the actual seam allowance since this is not sewn together yet. So when it's already sewn together, you don't have to worry about losing anything because it's one piece, but this is two pieces. And I'm going to use a very large seam allowance because I left all the salvages on all of this fabric because I was lazy. So keep that in mind. It may need recutting later, or you may need to factor that into your radius. At this point, the circle skirt calculator is not accounting for your pieces not being pre-assembled. And then what I'm doing now is measuring the fabric length. That is the skirt length, basically. And that will be the bottom of the skirt. Somewhere along this point, I was thinking this must be how Tom Holland feels shooting in Spider-Man, crouched down like that, so... After marking everything with chalk, I give it a sanity check. That's what I'm doing here, just to make sure, yep, if I'm holding it up the side, that is the length I want. And then I am using pinking shears when cutting everything. For satin, I think it helps a lot to prevent it from fraying. I've worked with many different satins and organza type, and they are such a pain and I hate them. But ever since getting pinking shears, I have felt a little more positively towards them. My scissors were struggling to go through all 4 layers at once though. Next I move on to cutting out the pockets, so I'm using just scraps. Usually I would put my phone down and trace around it, but my phone is recording, so I struggled. And I did make them a little too small in the end. So always go bigger, you can always sew it smaller. In this case, I made it small. Like, I don't know why I thought my hand not fully fitting in it is what I wanted. It's not what I wanted. Last time I made pockets, I made them way too big, but you can always go back and make them smaller. So do make them a little bit bigger than what I've done here. With the pockets cut out now, I'm putting my 2 panels right side together. I'm pinning them in place because satin's very slippery, and first I want to just get them lined up and proper so that the pockets are even. You're going to take your pockets and you're going to put them wrong sides together so that they fit right side together with your panel top. And I'm pinning those in place separately because the next thing we're going to do is go to the machine and just sew that pocket portion onto each panel. And I tried to do it about 6 inches from the top on both sides. Ultimately, as long as you're even on your same side, that's what you want. And then it's also important to point your pocket downward on the skirt, if that makes sense, so that gravity holds things down in the pocket and not have it fall out and things inside. Just to show again, the curve of the pocket is facing downward. Now I'm just sewing all 4 pocket panels to the 2 spots on each circle skirt panel. I'm using a back stitch here at the beginning and the end, and then I have a really wide seam allowance just because once again I've included all the selvage on these pieces. The seam allowance doesn't matter on this as long as you're consistent. Next it's time to lay out the panels that were already sewn with the pockets on. So I'm going to line those up right sides together with the pockets folded outward. Technically you should iron the seams where we just put in the pockets, but I didn't want to, so I didn't. I am pinning this together so that I can go sew it, and then kind of like how I just traced with my finger, we're going to sew straight, sew around the pocket, and then sew straight again. So that beep was me setting up my sewing machine to stay with the needle down. This will be helpful when we get to the pockets to be able to maneuver and make a nice corner. But here I've just started at the bottom of the skirt and I'm working my way up that whole side seam towards the pocket. Once getting to the pocket, stopping, pivoting with my needle in, and then rotating, going around the pocket, and then once again stopping with needle in, and then going up to the middle of the skirt. So just doing this on both sides. this point, the skirt is sewn and there are pockets. I am checking right now if I can still pull it up and down. I was able to at this point, but for reasons that I'll explain later, this was too small. So what you should actually do is check that what you've created is that original measurement that you took, measuring the whole open circle, because even if it fits you now, once you put the waistband on, it might not. So double check that before moving on, and then we're onto the waistband.
It's a new day, just like the Spider-Man movie. And waistband, that's where we left off last night. So I think I've decided I've slept on it, and I am not going to do the second layer in this video. I don't have exact direction on what I want to do, and I'd really like to just finish the skirt. So it's easy enough to add it later, whether I want to put it on the top or the bottom, because I could essentially just make a second layer if I want to put it on the top, just how I made this skirt, minus the pockets, with its own like elastic waistband, and that's super easy. Or after I've hemmed this skirt, I can just add this over top. So the reason I'm waiting is I don't know how I want to finish the raw edges of this when I cut the flame details, and I don't want to think about it right now. So waistband. What we need now is a strip of fabric that we're going to put here, and then what we'll do is we make it the same length as what this actually is, or the same circumference, I should say. Then we run the elastic in it that's the size of your waist itself, and then that's what makes that gathering effect. So we need, you can either use the same fabric I've got left over, or if you know it's gonna get covered and you'd rather use an easier fabric, my bad. If you'd rather use an easier fabric, that is something you can do. So I'm gonna measure this. It is 18.5 inches, so I'm gonna need a strip that's double that since I need to do a full circle. And then I'm gonna do about 3 inches wide. Usually I have about inch wide elastic. I've done 2.5 in the past, but I've noticed that it's really hard to get both sides of it. You fold it in half. The more width of fabric you give yourself, the easier it's going to be to keep enough space for the elastic without bunching it and still get everything. I also did cut this all with pinking shears because satin is notorious for fraying. Sometimes when I cut the waistband, I'll use my rotary cutter, which is not, then it frays. So sometimes I have to overlock this as well. If I were doing multiple layers and I knew that right now, I would cut both layers, they'd both be this size, and then I would put them together by overlocking the whole waist area and then put the waistband on. So that's how I did those other skirts over there, is I did everything and then I did the waistband last. But like I said, it's easy to add layers on top if you want to, if you just make them another skirt. Otherwise, you could always just take off the waistband, sew on your second layer, and put the waistband back on. So there's options. Let's get moving.
With my fabric folded in half, I'm going to cut it to what I had measured. So I measured 18, doubled, which is going to be wrong in the future, but in this case, I have it folded in half and measuring to 18, and then I am doing 18 by 3 inches in this case. So the 3 inches was what I was talking about. It's nicer when you have more space to run that elastic through.
This is my strip of fabric that I just cut. I did include the selvage. That's because it's going to be in the back. It'll be on the inside. What I'm going to start by doing is sewing the two sides together to make a loop. And something I should have mentioned, when you cut it, make sure you cut an extra seam allowance, just so that when you do this, you don't now have the wrong size for your skirt. I will say, this is going to gather itself. It's not perfect. It is not scientific. So if it's a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch too short, you're not gonna notice at the end when the skirt physically gathers together. All right. Sew this together real quick. I'm putting it right sides together. I'm just gonna sew right there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is open this up and fold it in half. And this is where my elastic is going to run through on this skirt. So, grabbing my waist, I'm going to put this in the back. It doesn't matter which panel is the front or the back, unless you know you did something wrong, I guess. But leave the pockets on the side, unless you like front and back pockets. Who am I to tell you not to? So now I'm going to take my band here and I am just going to align it. I am not, when I do this, I'm going to start about 1 inch from my seam and go around and then end about 1 inch again. And that is so that I can run the elastic through it and then I'll sew it through at the end and it'll encase everything. The other way that I have seen people do elastic waistbands, and this is the way that I don't hate it, I don't love it, I've never done it, is they take the elastic and they pull it taut, and then they'll just sew it on the fabric, and then they just let the elastic, with a zigzag stitch, and then they let the elastic snap back into place. It's like fine, but I don't think you get as much control over how much you're gathering, and then you're sewing directly into the elastic, and that's just stuff I don't like doing. So I like this a little better. You don't see the zigzag stitching or anything like that. You can fold it over, so like what sometimes they'll do is they will stretch it out, zigzag stitch, then they'll fold it over twice. So that would give you the same-ish appearance as this, but really stretching out elastic and trying to sew it on. I've done it. I did it on that one shirt that I showed that I hate. Did I do it as an afterthought? Yes. So did it work entirely? No. But nonetheless, it was such a pain. I just find this easier. Every time I get to one of these seams, I'm just gonna try to lay it flat. If it doesn't lay flat, it doesn't matter. This is just for like comfort. I don't know if you would even notice if you don't do it, but if you're a better sewer than me, you would iron that all before doing this. I love and hate satin because it's just so freaking annoying. Just how much it slides and slips. Sometimes it's pretty, sometimes it's not. So, this is from Mood Fabrics. I don't know if I mentioned that. This is a dull bridal satin in orange. I just stepped on my chalk. Don't be like me. Clear your work area before walking around. Anyway, we're gonna cut the elastic. So I have a woven elastic, or sorry, this is a knit elastic. You can otherwise use a woven elastic. I have both right now, but this one just seems stronger. And something that happens when you start layering all this fabric is it gets really heavy. So you want like a decently strong piece of elastic. If you only have like weak elastic, just double it up a few times. Cut a few strips that are the right length, and then when we go to sew them into a loop anyway, just sew all of them together. That should help give some structure, but in this case I have this, and this is only one layer right now, so this should be plenty to hold it up. My other piece of advice is when you measure it around your waist, try to pull it fairly tight. If you leave it kind of loose, then when gravity starts pulling your skirt, it's gonna start to sit lower. So if you you don't need to max out your elastic, but you wanna be close, then gravity won't be able to pull it down so much. So this feels comfortable. This is not max elastic, because you also don't wanna max out your elastic because you wanna be able to pull it up, right? So this feels pretty comfortable. It's pretty tight, pretty taut. So I'm just gonna cut my piece here. The scissors are right next to me the whole time. So I'm just gonna cut my piece here. And I am going to double check that if this were sewn together, I can still get it over my butt. I wanna make sure it's not twisted. So if I hold it here, I can get that over my butt pretty easily. And it snugs up tight to my waist. So that is what we want. Okay, for the next step, you're going to want 2 safety pins. Get this out of the way before I start kicking it and making loud noises. So I had safety pins in here until I dumped everything out. Let's see what we got. Perfect, 2 safety pins. And 1 safety pin I'm going to just put on my elastic as my like runner. It just gives me a hard piece to hold as I feed it through. And the other piece is going to hold the elastic as this starts bunching and tightening. I don't want to lose my other end inside of it. So here is my open seam area again. So we're going to feed through this tube that I've created. You can see my finger in there. If you feed through here, you're not gonna get very far. So I'm gonna start feeding it. And like I said, the safety pin is just something hard to hold on to in this case. So I can just bunch it up and then pull the elastic through. I wanna be careful not to fold my elastic. It's not the end of the world. It's just, it annoys me. I start to get my elastic second end near the hole. That's when I'll pin it in place, when it starts to get close, so that I don't lose it inside and I can still pull more of the skirt on. This creating a channel, feeding it through, is the same way I did that chemise that I showed at the beginning of the video. If there is any interest in a full tutorial on a gathered Ren Fair chemise, leave it in the comments. At this point I have the tails of the elastic, so this is when I'm going to sew them together. So I'm just going to set to a zigzag stitch that is wide and is short, and put my 2 pieces flat next to each other. And I'm going to turn the speed way down. Let it feed. I'm gonna reverse over it a few times, and I'm just gonna do this until I like how secure it looks, basically. Plenty. So now it is one piece, nice and sturdy. Cut my thread, and when I pull it taut, it's going to sink itself into the channel, which is perfect. Back to a straight stitch. And now I'm just going to finish up this run. And this is where you'll want to have none of your gathers on this side and kind of move it to this side just so that you can get a flat, straight piece to sew without having to stretch the elastic, because it is so annoying to stretch elastic while you sew. And I feel the elastic right here. I'm going to try to avoid the elastic because if you sew it in a straight stitch, it no longer is stretchy. Also, all right, I feel my elastic. I have all of my rows. I'm going to pull the gathers so that I have a nice straight line to sew. Oh, and I took off the foot pedal. Like I said, if it gets bumpy in here, the whole dress is bumpy, so more or less bumpy depending on how much gathering you chose at the beginning when you made your waist radius. Once again, I'm just gonna double check I caught, it's especially the middle layer that I tend to lose. Looks like I got everything. Wow, my tension is really bad. Ignore that. Okay, but now I've enclosed my elastic in my channel. So the last step then is hemming. But before I hem, I'm going to try it on and determine what length I want to hem it at. So I went to try it on and I couldn't get it over my butt. So I think where I went wrong is I forgot about the seam allowance when I cut, like this is a lot of seam allowance to put the selvage in. So what I'm gonna do, I am going to take off the waistband. I am going to cut the radius a little longer, and this is why I always cut it a little longer. A, I don't know what kind of hem I'm gonna do. B, you never know. And then I'm going to have to cut a new length to match that radius. So when I put on the skirt itself, without the waistband, it did fit. So I'm not exactly sure. I didn't lose that much when I put this waistband on. I'm going to guess, well, the waistband is 36. My butt is like 41. So that's definitely where I went wrong. But if I cut a longer waistband, it's not going to fit on this radius skirt because we measured the radius. So all that to say, I'm gonna undo everything and then I'll be back when I've redone it all. Okay, so an hour of resewing later, I think I realized where I went wrong. So anyway, what I did to fix this, I cut down the skirt to the radius of, oh, tornado siren's going off? It's noon. Anyway, my heart dropped. I'm in the basement anyway, so I'm fine. But anyway, so I cut the radius before this was one piece. The circle skirt calculator is for when you have one piece and you double fold it and then you cut it. So I cut the radius and then I sewed it together. So I lost some of my overall radius, or sorry, circumference there. And what happened when I put on the skirt without the waistband is when you cut it, a fabric like this, you can see the weave like goes in a grid. So when you make a cut that, if your grid is this way and then you cut it at a diagonal there, it has some give. So just trying on the skirt was not enough. I should have verified the measurement after I sewed it together. And then there is no give on the waistband, like the skirt itself gives, because you're cutting parallel to that grain. So I believe that's what happened. All I did was add about a 5-inch panel into my existing waistband. I took it all off. I cut the skirt to be a radius of 42 inches. I added about 5 inches on to what I already had from the waistband. It was actually 37 inches that I had, so that's why I only needed the extra 5 inches. Then I sewed it all back together, and now here we are. And it fits, and I can put it on, and actually easily, which is great. So here is skirt, and it is really long, which I did on purpose because there are a few different hemming techniques, and also I'm glad I did this because obviously we just lost some length. And I didn't account for, you get about an inch back when you do this method. Now hemming, which is, in my opinion, the worst part. So I have some different skirts here to show different hemming or finishing techniques. So this is like your classic regular rolled hem. How I did it was I folded about a 1/2 inch twice, probably just over a 1/2 inch. And it's really, really frustrating. So you see this ripple that's kind of on the skirt. That's because you're trying to do a square hemming technique on a circle. So you have to stay tangent every single time you fold. So this becomes a really annoying process, in my opinion, but it does allow you to hide extra fabric. You could do this as thick as you want. So let's say you're making a costume that might be going to someone else in the future or something like that. If you save that fabric, then they could rehem it in the future and make it longer. And then the other technique is this kind of rolled baby hem. This is also really frustrating to do. I hate hemming. That's just too bad. It's kind of hard to do on these more synthetic fabrics. You can see this one's not perfect. It didn't hide that full raw edge. But after watching a Sarah Spaceman video, she's an amazing seamstress and cosplayer. She recommended just do it again. And you know what I did on this one? And it shows, it looks better. It was hard to fit this thick of fabric through the rolled hem foot again, but I made it work. There's a few different ways to do a rolled hem. There is using the foot for the sewing machine, which is how I've done it. And I've also seen where people will sew like a horsehair braid or something like that, and then they fold it over, or like a tearaway stabilizer, then they can fold that over, sew it twice, and then they tear away the stabilizer. That is something I've never tried. That's how you can do hems. I'm gonna think about it, and then, well, you'll know what I picked, because we'll get moving. So I just found out I never hit record. So this is the rolled hem foot. It's in the machine right now because I've been doing this for the past 10 minutes, and I didn't record any of it. I'll record a little bit now, but here I'm getting some mixed results. So I've got some really good areas. I've got some areas where the fold, like when I first started out, and this is always my experience when I first start out, is I don't have enough fabric I'm feeding into it. So you start to you don't get the double roll, you just get one roll. Then I had a good streak, and then I had too much fabric, and that's where you get this. It's double rolled, but you still see a raw edge. And that's when we go around a second time, all of that's gonna even out. If you even wanna bother going through a second time, because if you look at it from the front, it all looks the same. So depending on what level of perfection you're going for. So I'll sew a little bit now, just so you can see what I'm doing. I am by no means an expert, and this is not the best angle, just because there's so much fabric. But the goal is you don't want to let your skirt weigh down when you're going. I go slow and steady, a little bit at a time, and I just pre-fold the fabric. You want to still make sure you're going like tangent at all times, so you should be straight on with the sewing foot when you're at the sewing foot, but you're going to be curved before and after, and that's actually what you want. You want to make sure you don't have so little fabric that you lose your roll completely. So I'll just fold it over little by little as I go. And I also mentioned I'm doing a longer stitch so that I could seam rip. I mean, it's only a 3 versus like the default is, yeah, 2.5, so it's really not that much longer. I don't intend on seam ripping this. That was kind of a dumb thing to say because I would just cut it. I would not seam rip a hem if it were a baby hem. If it were the kind of hem where you've hidden extra fabric away in it, then yes, I would, because that's kind of the intention. But I would simply cut this. It's not worth it. So anyway, I'm just gonna continue on, and I will either check back when I do a second loop, or I might just call it good enough. We'll see what it looks like when it is all done. But slow and steady wins the race when it comes to the baby hem. So I just made it back to the start of the skirt, and now I'm starting to go around the second time. I wasn't sure I wanted to because I'm not sure that I care, but it obviously looks, oh, it's still hidden by the machine. Hang on. It obviously cleans it up a lot. So it looked like this before, and now it looks like this after going a second time. So it is nice, and you only have one seam on the front still. So even though you see the overlapping on the back here, if my camera will focus, you see there's two seams back here. There's only one on the front, and I also had to adjust my tension while I was going through. So honestly, I am going to continue doing this because the front thread is really ugly right now. So it works the same way as how it went through the first time. It grabs itself sometimes a little easier than actually when you were doing it, like by hand feeding in the fabric. So it's not so bad. We'll see how far I get. I might quit in the middle, but we'll see what happens. So here we are. Final skirt. So here is the skirt. It is a pretty good length. I'm gonna have shoes on, so it'll be closer to here. I forgot to mention earlier, but one of the effects of the rolled foot that you'll see is it's kind of got like a curliness to it that is common since you're adding a lot of like bunched fabric and tension here. You're gonna kind of get those curls. I think they're cute. And then the hem actually turned out really well. So this is after going through a second time. You can see it's pretty nice. So I'm really happy with that. Got my pockets. So that is my tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed, you learned something, and if you're making your own, I hope it goes really well. I'll have links to the circle skirt calculator down below, and then I'll also put details of how much fabric this was, and the circle skirt calculator will tell you how much you need, but that'll give you a baseline for reference. I am 5'3"-ish. So if you are a similar height, that might be helpful for you. So that will be down below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, you know what to do. Anyway, follow for more tutorials and cosplay walkthroughs.
Now you get to watch me frolic in my latest creation. Truly thank you if you made it all the way through this video. This was maybe needlessly thorough, but I hope that I had a lot of useful detail for people who are making their first circle skirt. Thanks.